Here we are at the last episode of Dr. Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project on Gaia, and it has been a pretty wild ride, but I want to go ahead and bring things full circle to something that we discussed in episode 1, but never revisited, and that was the common ground between yourself and Dr. Stephen Greer.
Yes, Steve and I, despite some of our differences, we have a similarity in that we both have a near-death experience. Before I tell this story, I just want to say that this story is where a lot of my belief or my willingness to believe in things like aliens and things like the paranormal and stuff like that, a lot of it is anchored in this experience because as far as I know, this happened to me. And like whether what I'm about to say was a dream or not, it happened to me. And that's something that I can't ever really fully make sense of.
And I'm not saying I have no experiences of my own accord that leave me having a level of openness to interdimensional beings or aliens or any of the stuff that has gotten us genuinely interested in this topic, absent of the difficulty we have taking Stephen Greer on his own claims. But it is a major influence to me that of all the people in the world that I don't think are full of shit and malarkey, you are one of them. So while I have a difficult time seeing something that someone posted to Reddit or Twitter and just taking it at face value, I've known you for years. And I know the complexity of your thinking and how intellectual you are and how thoughtful you are, and also what a good person you are who is not out to mislead me or other people. So knowing that you have this story in and of itself is something that can anchor me in the realm of possibilities.
Right. Well, here's the story.
Okay, yeah.
So I've done some reflecting on this so I can have my ages and my times, just all the more accurate. And maybe we have my mom on the podcast someday and she tells you, because I told the story to her first. Anyway, here's the story. I was 6 years old and I was at my sister's softball game, and I was playing around with this little stick that I had found like nearby, and I was like poking my mom with it and like hitting it on things. And I think I had recently just started playing like The Legend of Zelda, and I wanted to be like Link, like hitting stuff. And so my mom said, go put that stick back right where you found it, or something like that. And being kind of mad about it as a kid, I was like, fine, I'm going to go put it back literally right where I found it. And I was walking along, and I remember I was just about to like take the step forward to set the stick down. And all I remember was hearing that like aluminum ping that you hear like when a bat hits a ball, except it was a bat hitting me. And I heard that ping, and then I fell backward and like just, everything went black.
And you were standing behind?
So what had happened, I guess, and it's weird. I mean, when kids have such tunnel vision, I guess, but I just walked past a girl who was taking practice swings like before she went to go bat. So she was swinging as hard as she could.
And she was just unaware of you behind her. And as you're like moving forward to replace the stick where you found it,
right,
she's just
swinging, just taking a practice swing before batting.
Okay, so and you hear the ping.
I hear the ping, and I just remember having a thought like, it sounds like when a ball gets hit. And then I was just like out. So then this is the kooky part of the story. Whether it was a dream or whatever, I'm not saying because I don't know. But after I got hit by the bat, what I remember is being in this place that was like, it was almost like being on a moon, because I could see the earth in the sky, like above us. And it was really cool. And I remember there being trees around and like green plains and hills and this little river.
Was it bright? Was it like being
bright.
out in the day?
It was like being out in the middle of the day, and it was bright and it was great. And there was this little river going under like a stone bridge. And I don't remember if I walked over to the bridge or if I was already on it. But I was like sitting on the edge of it or looking over it into the water, and I could see like the earth like reflected in the water. And there were these two people there that I told my mom later were angels, but they were like bright and they were in light clothing. And I remember...
And you were raised Catholic, so
I was raised
the
Catholic.
Notion of angels is something that's definitely in your...
Right. I mean, my family was hitting up 5 o'clock mass every Saturday, going to Garvey's afterwards, getting some pizza. So like what an angel was and like was in my, consciousness or whatever. And I remember them talking with me. I don't remember all the details of the conversation, but the main point was they were asking me if I wanted to go back to Earth. And I remember asking them like if I had to, and they said no. But they said, if you decide not to go back, you can't change your mind, is what I remember like being told. I vaguely remember kind of asking them or them alluding to me like, hey, like you're just a kid. Like there's still a lot of fun you could have down there, but you can also just come with us and it'll be just as fine. Is like kind of the vibe I remember having from them. And I must have chosen to...
So you don't actually remember choosing?
I don't remember choosing. I remember being given the option. And again, I'm just sitting on the edge of this bridge and like looking down into the water, and in the water is Earth reflected. And like what I will say, and because I don't remember anything else they said, so I'm not going to extrapolate any nonsense and make it up. But I just remember the beings or angels or whatever being like, I didn't know this at the time, but very like witty. Like I remember them being almost...
And do they look like people?
I don't know. I mean, I think at the time I would have said yes, but I honestly don't remember. I just remember like when I think back on this memory and how it felt, I remember them not like making fun of me, but I would liken it to, if there are any Tolkien fans listening to this, how Legolas talks about the Fellowship. He sees them as children. Because he's like 5,000 years old, and everyone else in the Fellowship is only, like 30, 40,
I didn't
60.
remember that. I didn't know that.
It's not in the movies much. But in the book, Legolas laughs at
just
them.
for everybody listening, how many times have you read The Lord of the Rings?
Probably 5 or 6 times.
And how many times in the past, 2 years?
2 times in the past 2 years. But that's... So if anyone's read Lord of the Rings or seen it, like, just that vibe of Legolas smiling at what he thinks are children and just being like, look at you guys, like you're so little. That's what I remember like feeling. I remember waking up and my sister's coach was looking at me and I think like telling me to breathe, and my mom was nearby like crying. My chest hurt really bad, and I remember kind of laying down for the rest of the day. But here's the crazy part. You might be thinking, well, that doesn't mean it's a near-death experience, like maybe you just got knocked out. Well, I went to the doctor a few days later, or maybe just the next day, and they were just checking me out and seeing where I'd been hit. And I think my mom must have told them how long I was asleep and how my breathing had been. And the doctor said that he was surprised I hadn't died because the bat must have hit me on a heartbeat, so my heart just kept going. But he said if I'd been hit between heartbeats, I could have easily just died, like just been dead.
That's crazy.
So who knows? Like maybe I did like kind of get hit. I don't know. Maybe I did like die a little bit. Like I don't know. But that's my near-death experience. And like because of that, I want to bring this all around to say Gaia episode 10 is kind of just a lot of summaries and restatements from Greer. And like what sucks is like, I don't disagree with Greer that I want a perfect world where there's no war and like all this stuff. I can agree with a lot of kind of hippie sentiments, I think, because of this experience I had. But I'm not willing to like stake my life on this experience. Like I wouldn't write a book and try to sell it. People do like... Well,
there was that kid that a few years ago, and I think the book title is something super general. It's like, I went to heaven.
It's like I saw heaven.
Yeah.
Or like 7 minutes of heaven.
But my family was really into that book when it came out and trying to get me to read it. And I remember when the story came out of the child who now is a few years older saying like, yeah, I made all that stuff up. And I couldn't tell my family that I'd come across that information, even though I would still occasionally hear them talking and reflecting on that book, just because it bothered me to take that away from them.
Yeah. And speaking of like your family making you read that stuff, like something I do want to point out as well is, yes, I was raised religious, and my dad especially was like always into talking about aliens. And like we used to drive down this road where you could see the top of like a Walmart or something, like through the trees, and the top of it looked like spaceships. So we would always drive past it, and my dad would say, "Look, there's the aliens," and me and my sister would be like, "What? Where are the aliens?" So I just want to say, like, if you're skeptical of my story, or if you think it's a silly story, like you should be, because like I was raised religious and I loved stuff like aliens and like weird stuff. So it would make sense for me that as a kid to have some weird dream where I'm talking to some beings on a moon, essentially. You know what I mean? Like,
Well, I was also raised religious, and I would argue I was raised more religious.
Oh yeah, you were more religious than me.
In a lot of ways. And I also had a death experience that I don't remember because I was 5 years old, not on operating tapes, tonsils, like it wasn't anything major, but like I coded and they had to shock me back or whatever. And
I don't think you told me that.
Oh,
before.
I haven't?
No.
Yeah. So
that's crazy.
little brush right there. But here I am. And I have no memory of that experience. And I hate, I don't want to be the Scully in this situation. I want to be the Mulder. But I was raised really religiously and had a near-death experience and had nothing that went in that line. And my father, raised very religious, had a near-death experience and came back to report that like Christianity was super real. And then our family got even more religious after that experience. So I both love your story and how it unfolds in consciousness and the possibility of there being more life after this incarnation of life. But I also have all of these other things rattling in around in my head that makes me have a difficult time with either your experience or Greer's experience or whatever, my father's experience.
Well, it's the same for me as well. I mean, like, I love getting to tell people like my ghost stories, but even when I tell them, I'm always acknowledging what it probably really was. So I totally get it, and I think it's good that we have that feeling as we begin to talk for the last time about Steve.
Episode 10, the end of the Gaia disclosure series. If people are still around and listening to this, thanks for hanging on, not just to the series in general, but this particular episode, because here we are only just now getting around to Greer. And this episode was called The Delta of Change.
Like all great Gaia titles, it kind of means nothing.
It was just something he said in the episode at one point. Do you want to take a stab at summarizing this? I mean, you kind of did.
Yeah.
It's a collage of positive sentiments is how I would categorize this. This is just like, hey, do you want to feel good about something? Here's a smattering of feel-good aphorisms.
This was an episode, like I kind of said at the beginning, it was a lot of summaries of things we've heard before. The most recurring theme of this episode was Greer talking about the outlook for humanity. And like, if we can adopt these changes, if we can get our consciousness to this level and make peace on our planet, this is the outlook we're going to probably have. So it's kind of a re-summary of the entire Gaia series or disclosure series.
But with a major focus of ending on a positive and a hopeful note, it really bothered me that the episode began with him like talking about the children. It just seemed like such a cliche of
we have
think
to
of the children. We have to teach our children to meditate, which I'm on board with, us teaching children to meditate or pray or think about consciousness or whatnot. But after 9 episodes of Greer Malark, it irritates me that he's playing on our pathos in that way.
In such like a generic way. This is something I think we've kind of noticed again and again and again throughout this series, is like the ways Greer just wants to get a hold of your emotions. And I think something I'm taking away from this in the final episode is I do think Greer is more calculated than I thought at the beginning. I think he knows what he's doing. And the reason is like children, what about the children? That's like pathos grab number 1, right? And then as the episode goes on,
and what's next? It's world peace.
Right?
Those are like the 2 most general things of just ever. Like, think of the children and we want world peace.
He even says at one point, and this isn't his exo-racism, he's talking about other social issues. He goes, if we get our consciousness to this level, all social issues will be fine. No racism, no sexism, no class division. Like, this episode is just like, what does Greer want to say is going to be okay? and he'll just say it. Billy Carson's questions were at an all-time low, in my opinion. They didn't seem to follow any sort of logic.
Well, and part of the problem is, and this is something that has recurred from all of the episodes, is that he'll ask a question that refers to a question he asked earlier or a topic they addressed earlier, but that segment has clearly been entirely cut out of the episode because there's no frame of reference for the earlier thing. Like it clearly happened as they were filming, but it doesn't exist in the episode that we're watching.
And the best example of that, I would say, is that at one point in the episode, Greer mentions his term cosmic quarantine.
Which he came up with in the 90s.
Which he came up with in the 90s.
This isn't, what are you thinking about right now? It's not associated with that. This isn't a word he's using for SEO purposes. He's used the word quarantine regularly since the 90s.
Though I do wonder, it would be interesting to look into when this was filmed. Because if this was filmed like February 2020...
That's true.
It would be right before
that's a good
COVID.
Point.
Actually, speaking of which, so this won't be in this episode, but if you've listened to just this one or a couple of these, Allison and I are also going to have one more concluding Greer episode.
Just when we thought it was impossible to drag this out any longer, we've decided we need one more final Greer cap off.
And the reason we like to do that is because these episodes have just been commentary. It's just been us watching it, literally pressing pause and then starting to record. We just talk about the episode. So for this final Greer episode, we want to come in with some research that interested us, some maybe written segments, and some stuff like that.
And it's been difficult. These episodes, they don't have a high degree of focus because the task at hand for Greer is not proving to people anything. He's already speaking by and large to people that are in his information pipeline. It's very difficult to pinpoint him down what he's talking about each individual episode. So I really want to back up and look at this holistically.
Yeah, so if you're interested in watching more of a step-by-step researched written discussion about Greer, that will be on our channel hopefully in the next month or so. We're sort of shooting for. So if that interests you, maybe drop us a like, little subscribe so you don't miss that video when it comes out. If you have been sort of yearning for a more focused video about Greer, that will be what we are building towards. As a part of that, things like the production schedule and things like that is something I want to research. I want to know how long this took to shoot. I want to know when they shot this footage. I think that would be interesting because I kind of imagine if COVID was happening, I think he would have leaned into it more like he did with his newest film, Cosmic Hoax.
That's true.
Which was very politicized and probably the most sensationalist Greer media I've seen.
Okay, so let's go back to Billy's bad questions.
That should have been a segment as we were doing this. Billy's bad questions.
If I have to ingest more Billy Carson content, that absolutely will be.
So, Dr. Greer, what about reincarnation?
That was one of the questions, right? Did you write that one down specifically?
I did, yeah.
One of his questions, he asks Greer if the extraterrestrial intelligences would shut down a spaceship if we did manage to get out of our own solar system, which I think is a bizarre question because anyone already familiar with Greer knows in all likelihood how he's going to answer that question. Also, we're not even close to that level of technology, so I don't know why that's a prescient question to ask for this particular episode. And do you recall what Greer says?
He says, if we did, they would shut us down.
Yeah.
Right?
Because why? Because we're too violent.
Because we're not at a high enough level yet as a civilization.
But he then goes to detail his vision of the future in which he's older and military personnel are standing around him and an elder alien comes off a ship and, I don't know, gives him skin or something.
No, so this was a great part. And Greer had seen this in a dream, by the way, before, is that he's older, an alien comes, it's broadcasted all around the world, and everyone is overjoyed at what they're seeing with this peace between humans and aliens. And I think that was my favorite moment of editing throughout the series, because it then went through so at first it used stock footage of a guy
looking at his computer
and
being like, wow.
Well, so it started with a guy watching it and being kind of interested. Then the next one was a girl
looking at her phone
out in public, looking at her phone and cracking a huge smile. And then I don't remember what was in between those. Then like the fifth one it chose was this guy like pumping his fists in the air and like celebrating this union between humans and aliens. It was lovely. I loved it. That is interesting though that you brought up that question, because that's a great example of what you mentioned earlier, where Greer content is at such a level people are just going to believe what he's saying. So it's like, Greer, what would happen if we went out into space? Oh, aliens would shut us off. Like, there's no explanation of how they would do that. There's no explanation of what type of craft maybe humans would be using.
There's always a skipped step. I mean, there's a skip step. Was it the reincarnation question?
What I thought was weird about the reincarnation question was just the fact that it was asked at all. Like, I didn't really understand what that led from.
I think I know why reincarnation was brought up.
Go for it.
And that's because Greer's answer is essentially like, don't worry, your personality and consciousness still will exist in this imagined scenario, which is to say that like you will live forever in the incarnation that you, even if reincarnation exists, which I'm telling you it does, and I'm not giving you evidence how, but it does. Your personality still will permeate. Even when it merges into oneness, here's this special Vedic word that demonstrates that you can reconstitute your individual consciousness in the oneness. And that, to me, is major Greer disturbing bullshit, because it's just feeding you what you already want to believe. And I think that's why I got so obsessed with Greer in the first place, because I want to believe this stuff, and I am skeptical of any information that I come to already wanting to be pro or engaged or believing in it. Like that, to me, that's a red flag. If I come to something and it's like, yes, hopefully this, that's at the point that you got to really double down on the questions.
You know, I'm really glad that you just said what you said, because it reminded me of what my thing was this episode that I really want to believe in. And hearing Greer bring it up actually kind of killed something in me inside, because
what's that?
It was the epigenetic stuff. Like, because here's the thing. So for anyone who doesn't know, there's some people who think and who study that if you can meditate and bring your brain to a certain level of activity, that it actually heals parts of your like DNA, or like activates or turns off some genes. And it's thought that if you have like cancer that runs in your family, that if you can meditate, you can help your brain recognize that's like a gene it majorly wants to shut down, blah, 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 blah. I'm not saying it's real. I'm just saying it's something I got into for a while. It's something that really motivated my meditation for a bit. And I do have like some aggressive cancers that like run on my dad's part of our family. So there's like part of it I was like kind of hopeful, like, oh, maybe I won't even have to deal with it. Anyway, it was kind of sad for me to hear Greer like talking about epigenetics and like them showing yet another 3D brain on the screen. So it's like, oh man, like, because you're right, Greer touched every base he could possibly touch in this episode to like reassure everybody that things are okay.
And another one, there will be surplus. There's going to be no scarcity. As we bring in future generations into the world, their consciousness is just rising and rising and rising, and they have no encumbrances to that.
They're not even humans, he said, 500,000 years from now. They're just this...
a yuga.
A yuga in measurement. They're just this ascended form, which is also interesting to think how many of his bases he covered, because there's another thing Greer loves to do, which is talk with urgency, yet also be like, but we maybe have like 1,000 years to get it done. Like
it's both.
It's both. He'll say, we're at a fork in the road. Well, actually, we've been there for 100 years, but we're at a fork in the road. And then he'll say something like,
but our descendants have come back to
visit
us from the future to tell us if we keep going the way we are going, they are not going to exist.
Right.
But how... This is just like a basic time travel problem.
And
how are they here?
And if they're already visiting us, then that means we're fine. So it can't be that bad. No, so that was actually, I'm glad you mentioned that too, because Greer prefaces what he's saying at that part with, this is going to sound science fiction, but here's what I'm going to tell you. And he's basically talking about the Rendlesham UFO, which I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but there's a part of the story where someone is told they're being visited by either a human or some sort of alien from the future.
Well, and their message is the spiritual solution is oneness and understanding that we're one universe and one people, which is another one of those. I'm not saying I disagree with it. I'm just saying that we have very little other than here's a feel-good scenario, here's a feel-good scenario, here's a feel-good scenario, and here's what, if you don't follow it my way, we're not going to end up in this utopia. We're going to end up in chaos and destruction.
But he doesn't have the balls to totally let go of that hippie vision, because then he'll say, but we actually have like 1,000 years to get it. You know what I mean? It's like he can't quite commit to the full doomsday message because he knows that will detract from what he's saying.
Everything to all people.
Yeah.
In this general sense. Like he has to solve every problem, which means he has no particular stance.
Right. And he also probably knows on some level that within the next 20 or 30 years, none of this stuff is actually going to happen, which is why he has to say, but it could be 100 years from now. It could be 10,000 years from now. We're in our adolescence, he says.
Which is every doomsday cult, which is the Anjali stuff that's happening on UFO Twitter right now, which is the Moonies, which is this thing and that thing, and just a reoccurring theme. And like...
That's why I'm very excited to have a chance to research and write and organize some thoughts to talk about Greer, because I'd really like to... maybe just find out what's at the core of this rhetoric, like why it works so well. But I guess we learned in this episode why it works so well, which is that it can make you less afraid, of am I going to reincarnate? Is there going to be an afterlife? Well, if you listen to Greer, yeah, you're going to be around forever, and we're all going to be around together, and you're never going to be alone. And it's like, wow, that's the sales pitch, which he doesn't fail to mention CE5 in the last 5 minutes, actually a couple times.
Particularly in the question where Billy Carson asks him, what is your special vision for the future? And Greer answers, world peace rapidly followed by greater technologies. And it's like, well, what's my vision for the future? It's not world peace. What's your vision for the future? It's
world destruction.
Right. Like
World War III.
I keep coming to Greer content, and especially here at the last episode, wanting something that I can take away, and it's not there.
I'll tell you what you can take away. Actually, the real last question of this series it isn't Greer's outlook, but just if he has anything he wants to say, if he has anything else on his mind, which I want to mention of season 1 of Disclosure. This is season 1, we discovered. Will we be doing season 2? Probably not.
No, God.
Unless you guys really start watching this shit and smashing that like button and hitting that subscribe and going on my Patreon. No, I'm kidding. But Billy asks Steven Greer if there's just any last thoughts that he has, and he relates the story that happened in the 50s. He says when he was 1 year old, and there was a Colonel Corso, was out in the desert somewhere, and a UFO appeared to him, and then it reappeared as a heat wave in the distance, or like the distorted heat, whatever. And he was talking to the ET, and the ET was telling him to shut down certain radars, some of which were also directional energy weapons. And the Colonel was like, why? Why would I do this? What's in it for me? And the ET says, a whole new world. What does he say? If you can take it?
A new world if you can take it.
And I feel like you're kind of asking, what am I supposed to take away? Well, I don't know what you actually want to take away as Allison, but I think the way this series ends is like, we all got to play catch up to Greer. Greer's ready for it. Greer can take it. Can you take it? Like, can you actually let go of your worry about money and war and whatever? Like, I feel like this series or this season ends with a message of like, come on, like, get on it, or can you take it? Like, I don't know. I kind of felt like that was a weird call to action that was a little bit guilty as well. Like a whole new world if you can take it. And it's like, oh, are we as brave as Greer? What did he say at the beginning of Unacknowledged? His one regret.
Oh, is that no one had been as brave as him.
No one had been as brave as Greer.
Well, I think I'm just as brave as Greer. And if there's a new world, I will take it. And I'm here to go ahead and plant my flag that I don't need Greer to do that. And I think that if you've been following these disclosure series, you probably also know that Greer is not going to be your guru in this pursuit. So thanks so much for listening to this episode or any of the episodes in this series. Please let us know if there are any additional topics that you'd like us to cover. Thanks for your support. Thanks for listening. We're still figuring everything out, and we're happy to have you along the ride.
Yes, thank you so much, guys. Remember to like this video if you liked it, or dislike it if you hated it. It's fine if you hated it. And if you want to listen to more content like this, please hit subscribe, and we will see you guys soon. Bye.
Bye.